You will discover that you're being sabotaged by those closest to you. By applying these secret teachings of Napoleon Hill and Jung, your life will be completely transformed. You stand at a crossroads where most people never dare to pause. The invisible threads that bind you to mediocrity stretch in every direction, whispering their familiar lies about safety, about staying small, about the danger of cutting loose from what everyone else considers normal. But what if those very ties you've been taught to treasure are the chains that keep you from becoming who you were meant to be? Every morning, you wake to the same gravitational pull of expectations. Your phone buzzes with the urgent demands of others. Your mind immediately fills with the voices of those who've taught you to doubt your instincts, to second-guess your dreams, to apologize for taking up space in this world. These aren't necessarily bad people. They might love you, they might mean well. But love wrapped in limitation is still limitation. The curious thing about weakening ties is how they masquerade as strength. They present themselves as loyalty, as responsibility, as the right thing to do. They convince you that cutting them would make you selfish, ungrateful, or reckless. And so you carry them day after day like stones in your pockets, wondering why your steps feel so heavy, why your dreams feel so distant. But here's what Napoleon Hill understood when he studied the most successful people of his era. Every person who rises above the ordinary must first recognize the difference between connections that elevate and connections that drain. Hill called it the difference between the mastermind and the mob mind. The mastermind seeks associations that challenge, inspire, and expand. The mob mind clings to familiarity, even when that familiarity breeds stagnation. Jung saw it differently but arrived at the same truth. He recognized that we carry within us not just our own limiting beliefs, but the collective shadows of every person we've allowed to shape our identity. The disapproving parent who still lives in your head long after they've stopped speaking. The friend who rolls their eyes every time you mention a new goal. The partner who subtly undermines your confidence while claiming to protect you from disappointment. These psychological anchors don't just hold you back, they actively pull you down. They create what Jung called a participation mystique, a state where you lose yourself in the emotions, fears, and limitations of others. You begin to feel their anxiety as your own. You mistake their risk aversion for wisdom. You confuse their mediocrity for humility. Most people spend their entire lives unconscious of this dynamic. They wonder why they feel drained after certain conversations, why their motivation evaporates around certain people, why their dreams seem to shrink whenever they share them with their inner circle. They blame themselves for lacking willpower or vision, never realizing that they're trying to run a marathon while carrying the weight of everyone else's fears. The tragedy isn't that these ties exist. The tragedy is how few people recognize them for what they are. Energy vampires disguised as relationships, comfort zones disguised as love, and fear-based thinking disguised as practical advice. You've been conditioned to see cutting these ties as cruel or selfish. But what's truly cruel is allowing other people's limitations to become your ceiling. Think about the relationships in your life that consistently leave you feeling smaller rather than larger. The conversations that drain your enthusiasm rather than fuel it. The people who respond to your growth with suspicion, your dreams with skepticism, your success with subtle resentment. These aren't random occurrences. They're patterns. And patterns, once recognized, can be changed. The strongest people in history, the innovators, the leaders, the artists who changed the world, all shared one crucial ability. They could distinguish between constructive criticism and destructive influence. They surrounded themselves with people who saw their potential rather than their limitations. They built what Hill called a mastermind alliance, a network of relationships based on mutual elevation rather than mutual limitation. But this requires something that most people find terrifying: the willingness to disappoint others in service of becoming yourself. It means saying no to the guilt trips. It means setting boundaries with people who don't respect your growth. It means choosing your own path, even when it makes others uncomfortable. You see, the people who try to keep you small aren't necessarily evil. Often they're just afraid. Your growth threatens their comfort with staying the same. Your courage highlights their cowardice. Your expansion makes their contraction more obvious. So they pull you back down, not out of malice, but out of their own unconscious need to justify their choices. This is why Jung emphasized the importance of individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, separate from the collective expectations and projections of others. It's not about becoming isolated or cutting yourself off from all relationships. It's about developing the discernment to know which relationships serve your highest self and which ones keep you trapped in old patterns. The curious paradox is that the moment you begin to honor your own growth, you actually become more valuable to the people who matter. You stop being a source of validation for others' limitations and start being an inspiration for their possibilities. You transform from someone who enables mediocrity to someone who models excellence. But first, you must be willing to feel the discomfort of standing alone. You must be willing to face the guilt, the pressure, the accusations of selfishness that always come when you stop playing small. You must be willing to trust your inner compass, even when everyone around you insists you're heading in the wrong direction. The ties that weaken you aren't just external. Some of the strongest chains are the ones you've forged in your own mind. The voice that tells you to be realistic when you dare to dream big. The fear that masquerades as prudence when you consider taking a meaningful risk. The perfectionism that keeps you from starting anything important because you're afraid of not being good enough immediately. These internal ties are often the most difficult to break because they've become so familiar, so much a part of your identity, that you mistake them for your authentic self. But they're not. They're just the accumulated debris of every person who ever taught you to doubt your worth, question your abilities, or settle for less than you deserve. What would happen if you approached your relationships with the same discernment you'd use when choosing food for your body? Would you continue consuming things that made you sick simply because they were familiar? Would you keep eating poison just because someone who claimed to love you prepared it? Your mental and emotional diet is just as important as your physical one. The thoughts you allow into your mind, the conversations you engage in, the energy you absorb from others, all of these shape who you become. And just as you have the right to choose what goes into your body, you have the right to choose what influences your mind and spirit. The path forward isn't about becoming harsh or uncaring. It's about becoming selective. It's about developing the wisdom to invest your limited time and energy in relationships that honor your growth rather than exploit your insecurities. It's about building connections based on mutual respect for each other's potential rather than mutual agreement to stay small. This requires a fundamental shift in how you view relationships. Instead of seeing them as obligations you must fulfill regardless of their impact on your well-being, you begin to see them as conscious choices that either move you toward your highest self or away from it. You start asking different questions. Does this relationship inspire me to be better? Does this person celebrate my wins or diminish them? Do I feel energized or depleted after spending time with them? The answers to these questions will reveal which ties serve you and which ones weaken you. And once you have that clarity, you'll face the most important choice of your life. Will you have the courage to honor what you know to be true? Imagine waking up tomorrow in a world where every relationship in your life actively supported your growth, where every conversation left you feeling more confident rather than less, where every person in your inner circle saw your potential rather than your problems. Imagine the person you could become if you were surrounded only by people who believed in your ability to achieve extraordinary things. What would you attempt if you knew you had that kind of support? But most people don't ask those questions. Most people drift through life like sleepwalkers, unconsciously collecting toxic relationships the way a magnet collects metal shavings. They accept draining connections as normal, exhausting conversations as inevitable, and dream-crushing advice as wisdom. They've been so thoroughly conditioned to prioritize harmony over growth that they'll sacrifice their potential on the altar of keeping others comfortable. Watch them in their natural habitat, these prisoners of politeness, these martyrs of maintaining the status quo. They nod along when someone tells them their goals are unrealistic. They dim their light when it threatens to expose someone else's darkness. They apologize for their success and downplay their achievements, all in the name of not making others feel bad about themselves. You see them everywhere. The entrepreneur who stops sharing her business wins because her friends make snide comments about her getting too big for her britches. The artist who abandons his creative pursuits because his family insists he needs a real job. The woman who shrinks herself to fit into relationships that were never designed to hold her full magnificence. They've confused loyalty with self-betrayal, mistaken enabling for love. These people have become emotional sponges, absorbing every drop of negativity, doubt, and limitation from their environment. They carry other people's fears as if they were their own. They mistake other people's inability to dream for practical wisdom. They've become so addicted to approval that they'll contort themselves into impossible shapes just to avoid conflict or disappointment. The saddest part? They genuinely believe they're being good people. They think their willingness to sacrifice their dreams makes them noble. They've been taught that putting others first, regardless of whether those others deserve it or support their growth, is the highest form of love. But there's nothing loving about enabling someone's insecurity by dimming your own light. There's nothing noble about becoming small so others can feel big. Let me tell you about Sarah, a composite of dozens of people I've observed over the years, but her story could be your story, your neighbor's story, your sister's story. Sarah was brilliant. At 25, she had a business idea that could have revolutionized her industry. She'd done the research, identified the market gap, even drafted a business plan that made seasoned investors take notice. But Sarah had a problem. She was surrounded by people who'd never taken a meaningful risk in their lives, people who'd settled for mediocrity. So long ago they'd forgotten what ambition felt like. Her mother, a woman who'd abandoned her own dreams to play it safe, worried constantly about Sarah's unrealistic expectations. Her boyfriend, threatened by her drive and vision, kept pointing out all the ways she could fail. Her best friend, stuck in a job she hated, rolled her eyes every time Sarah mentioned her business plans. Be realistic, they told her. Most businesses fail, they reminded her. You have a good job now, why risk it, they asked. Each conversation chipped away at her confidence. Each doubt they planted grew into a voice in her head. Each time she shared her excitement, they responded with concern, with warnings, with subtle but persistent pressure to stay exactly where she was. Sarah began to doubt herself. Not because her idea was flawed, it wasn't. Not because she lacked the skills, she had them in abundance. She doubted herself because she'd surrounded herself with people who needed her to stay small in order to feel okay about their own choices. She'd built her inner circle from people who were more invested in her, staying the same than in her becoming extraordinary. So she compromised. Instead of launching her revolutionary business, she pitched a watered-down version to her current employer. Instead of betting on herself, she bet on playing it safe. Instead of surrounding herself with believers, she listened to the doubters. And that watered-down version? It went nowhere. Her employer took her ideas, diluted them further, and eventually shelved the project entirely. Sarah told herself she'd made the smart choice. She convinced herself that stability was better than uncertainty. But late at night, when the house was quiet and her thoughts were loud, she knew the truth. She'd traded her potential for peace. She'd chosen the approval of small-minded people over the respect of her future self. She'd let fear masquerading as love convince her to abandon the very thing that could have set her free. 5 years later, Sarah watched someone else launch the exact business she'd envisioned. This person had succeeded, not because they were more talented, they weren't, but because they'd had the wisdom to surround themselves with people who believed in possibilities rather than problems. They'd built a support system of encouragers rather than enablers of mediocrity. Sarah's story isn't unique, it's epidemic. Everywhere you look, you'll find brilliant people who've been convinced to settle, talented individuals who've been talked out of their dreams, potential leaders who've been conditioned to follow. They've all made the same fundamental error. They've prioritized the comfort of others over their own growth. The pattern is always the same. Someone begins to grow, to expand, to reach for something greater than their current circumstances. Immediately the people around them feel threatened. Not consciously perhaps, but the threat is real nonetheless. Growth is contagious, and people who've chosen stagnation don't want to catch it. Success is magnetic, and people who've made peace with failure don't want to be drawn toward the discomfort of trying again. So they do what humans do when they feel threatened. They attack. But they don't attack directly. That would be too obvious, too honest. Instead, they attack with concern. They attack with love. They attack with practical advice about why dreams are dangerous and ambition is selfish, and reaching for more is somehow a betrayal of who you're supposed to be. They'll tell you they're protecting you from disappointment, but they're really protecting themselves from the discomfort of watching you succeed while they stay stuck. They'll claim they're being realistic, but they're really being afraid. They'll insist they know what's best for you, but they can only see you through the lens of their own limitations. This is why most people never escape the gravitational pull of mediocrity. They're not just fighting their own fears and doubts, they're fighting the fears and doubts of everyone around them. They're not just overcoming their own resistance to growth, they're overcoming the collective resistance of everyone who needs them to stay the same. The tragedy is that these people genuinely believe they're helping. They think their discouragement is wisdom. Their warnings are love. Their attempts to keep you small are gifts. They can't see that by trying to protect you from failure, they're guaranteeing you'll never experience true success. They can't understand that by trying to shield you from disappointment, they're ensuring you'll live with the deeper disappointment of never knowing what you could have become. And so the cycle continues. Generation after generation of dreamers who learn to apologize for their ambition. Wave after wave of visionaries who dim their light to make others comfortable. Endless streams of potential that gets diverted into the acceptable channels of conformity and compromise. The worst part is watching how quickly these people adapt to their diminished circumstances, how readily they accept the story that they're being practical rather than cowardly, how easily they convince themselves that they chose safety rather than having safety chosen for them by people who were afraid of their greatness. They develop elaborate justifications for their surrender. They create complex explanations for why their dreams weren't realistic, why their goals were too ambitious, why their vision was somehow flawed. But underneath all those rational explanations lies a simple truth. They let other people's fear become their ceiling. The question that haunts them, though they rarely admit it, is not whether they made the right choice. The question is whether they made any choice at all. Because when you look closely at their story, you realize they didn't choose their path as much as they defaulted to it. They didn't select their limitations as much as they inherited them. They didn't decide to play small as much as they were convinced that playing small was the only safe option. And now they're trapped in lives that feel too small for their souls, relationships that drain rather than sustain them, and dreams that have been downsized to fit other people's comfort zones. They wake up each day to the quiet desperation of knowing they're capable of more, but lacking the courage to claim it. But what if you decided to write a different story? What if you chose to break the pattern that has trapped so many others? What if you had the audacity to prioritize your growth over other people's comfort, your potential over their fears, your dreams over their limitations? The decision to break free from weakening ties isn't just personal preference, it's psychological. Necessity backed by decades of research into human potential and peak performance. When Napoleon Hill interviewed over 500 successful individuals for Think and Grow Rich, he discovered a pattern that couldn't be ignored. Every person who achieved extraordinary results had learned to distinguish between relationships that elevated them and relationships that diminished them. Hill called this principle the mastermind alliance, but it was more than just networking. It was the conscious cultivation of an environment where your highest self could emerge. He observed that success wasn't just about individual willpower or talent, it was about the quality of influence you allowed into your psychological ecosystem. The most successful people had become ruthless gardeners of their mental environment, carefully choosing which seeds to allow to take root. Carl Jung approached this same truth from a psychological perspective. His concept of individuation, the process of becoming your authentic self, requires what he called differentiation. You must learn to separate your own thoughts, feelings, and aspirations from the collective unconscious of your social group. Jung understood that most people never become individuals at all. They remain psychological copies. of their environment, shaped entirely by external expectations and influences. The privilege of a lifetime, Jung wrote, is being who you are. But being who you are requires first recognizing who you are not. You are not the sum total of other people's fears. You are not the reflection of their limitations. You are not responsible for managing their insecurities by diminishing your own potential. Viktor Frankl, who survived the Nazi concentration camps and went on to develop logotherapy, discovered something profound about human resilience. Even in the most extreme circumstances, the one thing that couldn't be taken from a person was their freedom to choose their response. But Frankl also recognized that this freedom comes with a responsibility, the responsibility to choose influences that support your highest values rather than compromise them. Frankl observed that the people who survived the camps weren't necessarily the physically strongest, but those who maintained what he called meaning orientation, a clear sense of purpose that transcended their immediate circumstances. This required them to resist the psychological contagion of despair that pervaded their environment. They had to become selectively permeable to influence, allowing hope in while keeping despair out. The Stoic philosophers, particularly Epictetus, understood this principle 2,000 years ago. Epictetus, who himself had been a slave before, becoming one of history's greatest teachers of freedom, taught that our suffering comes not from what happens to us, but from our judgments about what happens to us. And those judgments are largely shaped by the company we keep. Show me who you spend time with, Epictetus taught, and I'll show you who you're becoming. He recognized that we inevitably absorb the attitudes, beliefs, and limitations of those around us unless we consciously choose otherwise. This is why he emphasized the importance of choosing our associations with the same care we'd choose our food, because they nourish or poison us in much the same way. James Clear, in his research on habit formation, discovered that our environment is often more powerful than our willpower. He found that people who successfully changed their lives didn't just change their behaviors, they changed their contexts. They removed themselves from situations that triggered old patterns and placed themselves in environments that supported new ones. Clear's research reveals why breaking weakening ties is so crucial. You're not just removing negative influences, you're creating space for positive ones. Every toxic relationship you eliminate creates room for a nourishing one. Every draining conversation you avoid leaves energy for an inspiring one. Every limiting belief you release makes space for an empowering one. The logic is simple but profound. If toxic relationships lead to diminished potential, then nourishing relationships lead to expanded potential. If environments that trigger your worst self create poor outcomes, then environments that inspire your best self create extraordinary outcomes. If you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with, then changing those 5 people will inevitably change who you become. Think of yourself as a river. A river's character isn't determined by what flows into it. It's determined by what it allows to flow through it and what it filters out. A pure mountain stream becomes polluted not because pollution is stronger than purity, but because the stream isn't selective about what it allows to contaminate its flow. You must become like a master sculptor with a block of marble. The sculpture already exists within the stone. Your job isn't to add to it, but to chip away everything that doesn't belong. Every weakening relationship you release is a piece of marble falling away, revealing more of your true form. Every limiting influence you eliminate brings you closer to the masterpiece you were meant to become. Or consider yourself as a gardener tending a precious garden. You wouldn't plant poison ivy next to roses and expect the roses to thrive. You wouldn't water weeds and wonder why your flowers struggled to grow. You'd be ruthless about removing anything that competed with your desired plants for nutrients, sunlight, and space. Your psychological garden requires the same level of care. The people you allow into your inner circle are either fertilizing your growth or contaminating your soil. The conversations you engage in are either providing nourishment for your dreams or spreading disease among your aspirations. The environments you frequent are either creating conditions for flourishing or fostering conditions for wilting. This isn't about becoming cold or calculating in your relationships. It's about becoming conscious. It's about recognizing that your energy, attention, and emotional capacity are finite resources that must be invested wisely. It's about understanding that every moment you spend trying to convince someone to believe in your potential is a moment you could have spent actualizing that potential. The research is clear. Emotional contagion is real. Mirror neurons ensure that we automatically absorb the emotional states of those around us. When you spend time with anxious people, you become more anxious. When you surround yourself with cynical people, you become more cynical. When you engage regularly with people who see problems rather than possibilities, you begin to see the world through their limitation-colored glasses. But the reverse is equally true. When you associate with confident people, you become more confident. When you surround yourself with optimistic people, you become more optimistic. When you engage with people who see opportunities rather than obstacles, you begin to recognize possibilities you never noticed before. This is why every wisdom tradition throughout history has emphasized the importance of choosing your associations carefully. The Buddha spoke of noble friendship as one of the essential factors in spiritual development. The Talmud teaches that, "Much have I learned from my teachers, more from my colleagues, but most of all from my students," recognizing that we learn and grow through the quality of our relationships. Even modern neuroscience confirms what ancient wisdom has always known. Our brains are constantly being rewired by our experiences, and our experiences are largely shaped by our relationships. The conversations we have literally change the structure of our brains. The emotional states we're exposed to actually alter our neural pathways. The beliefs we encounter regularly become the beliefs we unconsciously adopt. This means that choosing your relationships isn't just a social decision, it's a neurological one. You're not just deciding who to spend time with. You're deciding who gets to participate in the ongoing construction of your mind. You're not just choosing your social circle, you're choosing the influences that will shape your thoughts, beliefs, and ultimately your destiny. Understanding this transforms how you view the process of breaking weakening ties. It's not about being mean or selfish, it's about being responsible for your own psychological development. It's not about hurting others. It's about refusing to let others hurt you by limiting your growth. It's not about becoming isolated. It's about becoming intentional. The most successful people in any field understand this intuitively. They guard their mental environment as carefully as they guard their physical health. They're selective about the information they consume, the conversations they engage in, and the people they allow into their inner circle. They recognize that influence is power, and they're careful about who they grant that power to. This selectivity isn't born from arrogance or superiority. It's born from clarity about what they're trying to create and what supports or undermines that creation. They understand that saying yes to everyone means saying no to their highest potential. They recognize that being available to every demand means being unavailable for their deepest purpose. The transformation happens when you stop seeing this selectivity as selfishness and start seeing it as stewardship. You're not just responsible for your own growth. You're responsible for stewarding the gifts you've been given. And proper stewardship requires creating conditions where those gifts can flourish rather than allowing them to be diminished by people who can't see their value. Now that you understand the why, let's focus on the how. Breaking weakening ties isn't a single dramatic gesture. It's a series of daily choices that compound over time. It's a practice of conscious relationship curation that requires both courage and discernment. Here are the essential practices that will transform your social ecosystem, from one that drains you to one that empowers you. Practice the energy audit. Start each week by conducting what I call an energy audit of your relationships. After every significant interaction, pay attention to how you feel, not just emotionally but physically and mentally. Does this person leave you feeling expanded or contracted, energized or depleted, confident or insecure, optimistic or anxious? Create a simple system. After conversations with different people, rate your energy level on a scale from 1 to 10. 1 means you feel completely drained, as if someone sucked the life force right out of you. 10 means you feel inspired, motivated, and more connected to your own potential. Keep track of these ratings for 2 weeks. You'll be shocked by what you discover. That friend who always calls when they need something but never when you need support. They consistently rate a 3 or 4. That colleague who constantly complains about everything but never takes action to change anything. Another energy vampire, probably rating around a 2. That family member who responds to every piece of good news with a warning about why you should be careful. They're likely pulling you down to a 4 or 5 every time you interact. But you'll also discover the people who consistently leave you feeling like a 9 or 10. The friend who asks thoughtful questions about your goals and remembers to follow up on them. The mentor who challenges you to think bigger while providing practical support. The colleague who brainstorms solutions instead of dwelling on problems. These are your energy allies, and they deserve more of your time and attention. The audit isn't about keeping score or becoming calculating in your relationships. It's about developing awareness of how different relationships affect your capacity to show up as your best self. Once you have this awareness, you can make conscious choices about where to invest your relational energy. Implement the response gap. When someone tries to pull you into their drama, criticism, or limiting beliefs, resist the urge to respond immediately. Instead, create what I call a response gap, a space between their trigger and your reaction where you can choose your response consciously rather than reactively. Here's how it works in practice. When your mother calls to tell you why your latest goal is unrealistic, don't defend yourself immediately. When your friend starts complaining about why nothing ever works out for them, don't rush in with solutions or sympathy. When a colleague tries to drag you into gossip about office politics, don't automatically engage. Instead, pause. Take a breath. Ask yourself, what kind of energy do I want to bring to this moment? What response serves my highest good and theirs? How can I maintain my center while still being kind? Sometimes the answer will be to redirect the conversation. I understand you're concerned about my decision. I've given it a lot of thought and I'm committed to this path. Can we talk about something else? Sometimes it will be to set a boundary. I can see you're frustrated, but I'm not available to discuss this right now. Sometimes it will be to disengage entirely. I need to go, but I hope things get better for you. The key is responding from a place of choice rather than compulsion. Most people are so reactive in their relationships that they become emotional ping-pong balls, bouncing back and forth between other people's moods and agendas. The response gap gives you back your power to choose how you engage. Practice this with small interactions first. When someone cuts in front of you in line, use the response gap to choose calmness over irritation. When someone sends you a demanding email, use the gap to craft a response that's professional rather than defensive. As you strengthen this muscle with minor provocations, you'll find it easier to maintain your center during major relationship challenges. Establish clear boundaries with consequences. Setting boundaries isn't just about saying no, it's about creating a system where your yes means something because your no is respected. This requires not just stating your boundaries, but consistently enforcing them with appropriate consequences. Start by identifying your non-negotiables. These might include not accepting calls after 9 p.m. unless it's an emergency, not discussing your personal goals with people who consistently respond negatively, not lending money to people who haven't paid you back from previous loans, or not engaging in conversations that involve gossiping about others. Once you've identified your boundaries, communicate them clearly and kindly. I value our friendship, but I've decided not to discuss work complaints during our social time together. I'd rather focus on the positive things happening in our lives. Or, I appreciate your concern about my business venture, but I've made my decision and I'd prefer not to debate it. Let's talk about something else. The crucial part is what happens when someone tests your boundary, and they will test it. Someone will call you at 10 p.m. with non-emergency drama. Someone will try to drag you back into work complaints, despite your stated preference. Someone will continue offering unsolicited advice about your life choices even after you've asked them to stop. This is where consequences come in. End the late-night call politely but firmly. I told you I don't take calls after 9 p.m. unless it's an emergency. We can talk tomorrow. Change the subject when someone violates your conversational boundaries. Like I mentioned before, I don't want to discuss work complaints. Did you see that article about... If they persist, end the conversation. I can see you need to talk about this, but I'm not available for this discussion right now. The goal isn't to punish people, it's to train them to respect your boundaries, while training yourself to value your own well-being enough to protect it. Most people will adjust their behavior once they realize you're serious about your boundaries. Those who don't adjust reveal themselves as people who don't respect your growth, and that information is valuable in itself. Practice. Selective sharing. Stop casting your pearls before swine. Your dreams, goals, and aspirations are precious seeds that need the right soil to grow. Sharing them with people who don't have the capacity to nurture them is like planting roses in concrete. You're setting yourself up for disappointment and your dreams up for destruction. Develop discernment about who gets access to your vision. Before sharing something important with someone, ask yourself, has this person historically been supportive of my growth? Do they tend to see possibilities or problems? Are they more likely to encourage me or discourage me? Do they have their own track record of pursuing meaningful goals? Create different levels of sharing based on people's demonstrated capacity to handle your dreams with care. Level 1. People, your energy allies who consistently support your growth, get full access to your goals, challenges, and aspirations. Level 2 people, those who are neutral or inconsistently supportive, get limited access to general updates without sensitive details. Level 3 people, the energy drains who consistently respond to your sharing with negativity, get minimal access to surface-level information only. This isn't about being secretive or deceptive. It's about being strategic. When someone asks about your life, you can still be genuine without being vulnerable. Things are going really well. Thanks for asking. Conveys truth without giving ammunition to people who might use your vulnerability against you. Practice deflecting invasive questions with grace. When someone pries for details about something you're not ready to share with them, try responses like, I'm still working through the details on that one, or it's too early to say much about it yet, or I prefer to keep that private for now. Save your detailed sharing for people who have earned the right to hear your dreams by consistently supporting them. These are the people who ask follow-up questions because they care, not because they're looking for reasons to discourage you. These are the people who celebrate your wins and offer constructive support during your challenges. Implement the replacement principle as you create distance from weakening relationships. Actively seek out strengthening ones. Nature abhors a vacuum, and your social ecosystem is no exception. If you simply remove negative influences without replacing them with positive ones, you'll likely find yourself gravitating back toward the familiar patterns that weren't serving. You start by identifying the types of people who could support your growth. If you're building a business, seek out other entrepreneurs who understand the challenges and rewards of that path. If you're pursuing artistic goals, connect with other artists who take their craft seriously. If you're working on personal development, find others who are committed to growing, rather than staying comfortable. This doesn't mean abandoning all your existing relationships or only connecting with people who are exactly like you. It means consciously adding people to your circle who model the kinds of thinking, behavior, and attitudes you want to cultivate in yourself. Look for people who ask better questions than the ones you're used to hearing. Instead of, why would you want to do that, they ask, how can I support you in that? Instead of, what if it doesn't work, they ask, what would success look like? Instead of, that sounds risky, they say, that sounds exciting. Seek out environments where growth-minded people naturally gather. This might be professional associations in your field, workshops and seminars related to your interests, volunteer organizations aligned with your values, or online communities focused on the areas where you're trying to develop. Be patient with this process. Building authentic relationships takes time, and you can't replace 20 years of history overnight. But you can begin planting seeds today that will grow into the supportive network you deserve. Every growth-oriented person you meet, every inspiring conversation you have, every environment you enter where people are pursuing excellence rather than accepting mediocrity, these all contribute to the new social ecosystem you're creating. The most important thing to remember is that this isn't about perfection, it's about direction. You don't need to completely eliminate every challenging relationship or surround yourself only with people who never trigger you. You need to shift the balance so that the majority of your relational energy is going toward connections that elevate rather than diminish you. Start with one practice. Choose the one that resonates most strongly with your current situation and commit to implementing it consistently for the next 2 weeks. As it becomes natural, add another practice. Over time, these small daily choices will compound into a complete transformation of your social environment and consequently, your life. As you begin to implement these practices, you'll discover that breaking weakening ties isn't just about changing your external circumstances. It's about reclaiming your essential nature. Deep within you lies a truth that has been waiting patiently for the noise to quiet, for the distractions to fade, for the false voices to stop echoing in the chambers of your mind. This truth knows who you are beneath all the layers of other people's expectations and limitations. The river that knows its course. Imagine yourself as a powerful river that has forgotten its natural path to the sea. For years, you've been diverted through artificial channels built by well-meaning engineers who thought they knew better than the water itself, where it should flow. These channels seemed safe, predictable, contained. They promised to protect you from the uncertainties of finding your own way. But rivers aren't meant to be contained indefinitely. The water knows at some primal level that it belongs in the ocean. It feels the pull of gravity, the call of its destiny, the magnetic draw of where it's meant to be. And so the river begins to push against its artificial banks. It starts to overflow the channels that once seemed so reasonable, so necessary, so protective. This is what's happening to you. The artificial channels are the relationships that have shaped you into someone smaller than your true nature. The well-meaning engineers are the people who convinced you that their vision of your life was safer than your own. The overflow is your growing recognition that you can no longer be contained by other people's comfort zones. When a river breaks free from artificial constraints, it doesn't destroy everything in its path out of malice. It simply follows its nature. It finds the course that allows it to flow with maximum power and minimum resistance. It carves new channels that honor its true direction rather than forcing it into unnatural shapes. As you break free from weakening ties, you're not destroying relationships out of cruelty. You're following your nature toward the connections that allow you to flow with maximum authenticity and minimum friction. You're carving new channels in your social landscape that honor your true direction, rather than forcing you into shapes that never quite fit. The river doesn't apologize for seeking the sea. It doesn't feel guilty for leaving behind the artificial channels that once contained it. It doesn't worry about disappointing the engineers who built those channels with such care and intention. The river simply flows toward its destiny, trusting that this is what rivers are meant to do. You are that river. Your dreams, your potential, your authentic self. These are your ocean. The people and relationships that support your natural flow toward that destination deserve your energy and attention. The ones that insist on diverting you into smaller, safer channels deserve your gratitude for their intentions and your courage in moving beyond their limitations. The river doesn't become less loving when it breaks free from artificial constraints. It becomes more itself. And when you are more yourself, you have more authentic love to offer the world, not less. The lighthouse standing firm. Picture yourself as a lighthouse perched on a rocky cliff, built to withstand the most violent storms while providing guidance to those navigating treacherous waters. Your light, your authentic self, your values, your vision has the power to guide others to safety. But only if you remain firmly anchored to your foundation and refuse to be moved by the external chaos swirling around you. For too long, you've been trying to move your lighthouse to accommodate every ship that demands you shine your light in their preferred direction. One captain insists you should point your beacon toward the safe harbor of conventional choices. Another demands you dim your light because it makes them feel insecure about their own course. A third tries to convince you that your position on the cliff is too exposed, too dangerous, too far from where everyone else has built their lights. But lighthouses aren't designed to be mobile. They're designed to be unmovable. Their power comes not from their flexibility, but from their reliability. Ships navigate by lighthouse beams precisely because they know those lights will be in the same place, shining with the same intensity, regardless of weather conditions or external pressures. Your relationships should work the same way. The people who belong in your life are those who are grateful for your light as it is from where it shines. They don't try to move your lighthouse or dim your beam. They use your light to navigate toward their own authentic destinations, and in return, they offer their own steady illumination for your journey. The ships that demand you relocate your lighthouse, that insist you change your beam to accommodate their preferences, that try to convince you that your natural position is somehow wrong. These are not the vessels you were meant to guide. They're looking for a different kind of light, a more convenient beacon that requires less of them and accommodates more of their resistance to growth. This doesn't make them bad ships or bad people. It simply means they're not navigating toward the same destinations that your light illuminates. And that's perfectly fine. The ocean is vast enough for many different courses, and there are other lighthouses positioned to guide those ships safely to their preferred harbors. Your job isn't to be all lighthouses to all ships. Your job is to be the one lighthouse that you are positioned exactly where you're meant to be, shining exactly as brightly as your true nature demands. The right ships, the relationships that honor your authentic self, will be drawn to your light like magnetism. They'll be grateful for your steadiness, your refusal to compromise your position, your commitment to shining at full intensity. When storms arise, and they will arise, the lighthouse doesn't abandon its post. It doesn't dim its light to avoid offending the storm. It doesn't try to reason with the wind or negotiate with the waves. It simply continues to shine, trusting that its unwavering presence is the greatest gift it can offer to those navigating the turbulent waters. You are that lighthouse. Your authenticity is your beam. Your values are your foundation. Your refusal to be moved by other people's storms is your greatest strength. The relationships that deserve your energy are those that see your light as a blessing, not a burden. The Imam, Master Gardener's Sacred Grove. Envision yourself as a master gardener who has inherited a plot of sacred land. This land has unlimited potential. It could grow anything you choose to plant, but it's not unlimited in space or resources. Every square foot you give to weeds is a square foot stolen from flowers. Every nutrient that feeds a parasitic plant is nutrition unavailable to nourish the garden of your dreams. When you first inherited this land, you didn't understand its sacred nature. You allowed anyone to plant anything they wanted in your soil. Friends planted their fears. Family members planted their limitations. Colleagues planted their cynicism. Strangers threw seeds of doubt wherever they walked through your garden. For years, you've been confused about why your garden produces so little beauty, despite all your effort. You've wondered why your most cherished plants struggle to thrive. Despite your careful attention, you've questioned whether the problem is with your gardening skills, your commitment, or the quality of your soil. But now you understand, the problem isn't with you or your garden. The problem is that you've been trying to grow roses in soil contaminated by weeds, attempting to cultivate orchids in earth dominated by thorns, hoping to harvest fruit from trees that are being choked by vines you never chose to plant. The Master Gardener understands that cultivation requires not just planting, but also weeding, not just adding, but also removing, not just nurturing what you want to grow, but also eliminating what threatens to kill it. This isn't destruction, it's curation. It's the recognition that your garden is too precious to be polluted by influences that don't serve its highest purpose. Some of the weeds in your garden come disguised as flowers. They look beautiful at first glance. They might even produce occasional blooms that fool you into thinking they belong. But over time, you notice that wherever these plants grow, your most treasured flowers begin to wilt. Their roots run deep, stealing nutrients from the plants you actually chose. Their presence changes the entire chemistry of your soil. These are the relationships that seem positive on the surface, but gradually drain your vitality. The friend who supports you just enough to keep you engaged, but never enough to truly nourish your growth. The family member who loves you, but consistently plants seeds of worry and limitation in your mind. the colleague who appears to care about your success but subtly undermines your confidence with their constant warnings and doubts. The master gardener learns to recognize these imposter plants not by their appearance, but by their effect on the overall garden. If the presence of a plant makes it harder for your chosen flowers to bloom, it doesn't belong in your sacred space, regardless of how innocent or well-intentioned it might appear. But the master gardener doesn't just remove weeds. They actively cultivate the conditions for their desired plants to flourish. They choose seeds that complement each other, creating an ecosystem where each plant supports the growth of the others. They understand that a garden is not just a collection of individual plants, but a living system where every element either contributes to or detracts from the whole. This is how you must approach your relational garden. The people you allow into. Your inner circle should be like complementary plants, each one enhancing the growth of the others, creating an environment where everyone's highest potential can emerge. They should be relationships where your success makes others more successful, where your growth inspires others to grow, where your light helps others shine brighter rather than making them feel dim by comparison. The sacred grove you're cultivating isn't just about your own flowering, though that matters deeply. It's about creating a space so beautiful, so nourishing, so filled with authentic growth that it becomes a refuge for others who are seeking the same kind of environment. When you tend your relational garden with the care of a master gardener, you don't just transform your own life. You create a model of what's possible when people choose to surround themselves with influences that elevate rather than diminish. B. Master gardener knows that some seasons require more weeding than planting. Some years, the greatest act of love for your garden is removing what doesn't belong rather than adding something new. And some of the most important growth happens not in the visible blooming, but in the invisible strengthening of roots that occurs when plants no longer have to compete with weeds for the nutrients they need to thrive. Your sacred grove is waiting. Your master gardener skills are developing. Your most beautiful flowering is not behind you. It's ahead of you, waiting to emerge in the clean, nourishing soil you're preparing by removing everything that would compete with your authentic growth. Thus, ultimate mastery of breaking weakening ties comes not from dramatic confrontations or grand gestures of separation, but from the quiet cultivation of inner sovereignty. It emerges from your ability to remain centered in your own truth, regardless of the emotional weather patterns of those around you. This is where true freedom lives, not in controlling others, but in becoming uncontrollable by them. The power of sacred silence. There is a particular kind of power that comes from knowing when not to speak, when not to explain, when not to defend your choices to people who lack the capacity to understand them. This isn't the silence of shame or defeat. It's the silence of someone who knows their worth doesn't depend on external validation. Most people feel compelled to justify their decisions to everyone in their orbit. They exhaust themselves explaining why they're pursuing their dreams, defending their choices against criticism, trying to convince others to see their vision. But true power lies in the recognition that you don't owe anyone an explanation for becoming who you're meant to be. When someone questions your decision to distance yourself from draining relationships, you don't have to provide a detailed defense. When someone accuses you of changing or becoming selfish, you don't have to prove your goodness to them. When someone tries to guilt you back into old patterns, you don't have to engage in the emotional manipulation disguised as conversation. Sometimes, the most powerful response is simply, "I understand you see it differently. I've made my choice." Sometimes it's, "I appreciate your concern. This is what feels right for me." Sometimes it's just a gentle smile and a change of subject. And sometimes it's the profound silence of someone who no longer needs to convince others that their path is valid. This silence isn't cold or cruel, it's spacious and dignified. It creates room for others to have their feelings without making those feelings your responsibility to manage. It allows you to remain compassionate without becoming complicit in your own diminishment. Practice this silence in small moments first. When someone makes a passive-aggressive comment about your choices, let the silence hang in the air instead of rushing to fill it with explanations. When someone tries to bait you into defending your decisions, respond with curious calm rather than defensive energy. When someone projects their fears onto your future, let their words settle into silence, rather than bouncing them back with immediate reassurance or argument. You'll discover that silence has a way of clarifying relationships. People who genuinely care about your well-being will respect your choices, even when they don't fully understand them. People who are more invested in being right than in your happiness will be uncomfortable with your refusal to engage in their attempts to control you. That discomfort reveals the true nature of their concern. It was never really about you. The liberation of detachment. The deepest freedom comes when you release your attachment to how others respond to your growth. This doesn't mean becoming indifferent to the people you care about. It means becoming free from the need for their approval in order to feel good about your choices. Attachment to others' reactions keeps you trapped in a perpetual state of emotional dependence. You make decisions based not on what serves your highest good, but on what will generate the least resistance from your social environment. You measure the value of your choices by how others receive them, rather than by how they align with your authentic values and aspirations. Detachment is the recognition that other people's reactions to your growth belong to them, not to you. Their disappointment is theirs to feel and process. Their fear is theirs to examine and heal. Their resistance is theirs to understand and work through. You can have compassion for their struggle without making their struggle your problem to solve. This shift in perspective is profound. Instead of asking, how can I pursue my goals without upsetting anyone, you begin asking, how can I pursue my goals with integrity while remaining compassionate toward those who might be uncomfortable with my choices? Instead of, how can I change without anyone noticing, you ask, how can I honor my growth while allowing others to have their own experience of it? Detachment doesn't mean you stop caring about people. It means you stop making their emotional reactions the determining factor in your life decisions. You can love someone deeply while refusing to shrink yourself to accommodate their discomfort with your expansion. You can have compassion for their fear while declining to let that fear become your ceiling. Practice detachment by releasing your investment in convincing others that your path is right. When you share news about your life and someone responds with skepticism, notice if you feel compelled to provide more evidence or explanation. When you set a boundary and someone pushes back, observe whether you immediately want to justify or modify your position to make them feel better. The goal isn't to become uncaring, but to become unneedy, to reach the place where you can share your truth without requiring others to affirm it, where you can make choices that serve your growth without needing everyone to understand them, where you can love people while refusing to be limited by their limitations. Daily disciplines of self-mastery, breaking free from weakening ties, isn't a one-time event. It's an ongoing practice that requires daily disciplines to maintain your center and strengthen your inner sovereignty. These practices create the foundation that allows you to remain steady regardless of the external pressures you encounter. Begin each day with a practice of gratitude that focuses specifically on your growth and the relationships that support it. Instead of generic gratitude for everything good in my life, be specific about the ways your growth-oriented relationships have blessed you. Express appreciation for the friend who asked thoughtful questions about your goals, the mentor who challenged you to think bigger, the colleague who celebrated your wins without diminishing them with warnings. This practice rewires your brain to notice and value the nourishing relationships in your life, rather than taking them for granted while obsessing over the challenging ones. It creates a positive feedback loop where appreciation attracts more of what you appreciate. Cultivate a daily meditation practice that focuses on distinguishing between your authentic thoughts and feelings and the ones you've absorbed from others. Spend 10 minutes in quiet reflection, asking yourself, what am I feeling right now that truly belongs to me? What anxiety am I carrying that actually belongs to someone else? What limiting belief am I entertaining that was planted by someone who couldn't see my potential? This practice develops what Jung called the discriminating consciousness, the ability to sort through the contents of your mind and identify what serves your highest development versus what undermines it. Over time, you become skilled at recognizing when you're thinking someone else's thoughts about your life rather than your own. Implement a daily practice of visualizing yourself surrounded by relationships that honor your growth. Spend 5 minutes each morning imagining conversations where your ideas are received with enthusiasm, relationships where your success is celebrated without reservation, environments where your authentic self is not just accepted, but treasured. This isn't fantasy or delusion. It's programming your unconscious mind to recognize and attract the kinds of relationships that match your new standards. Your brain seeks to make your internal reality match your external experience, so consistently visualizing nourishing relationships helps you identify and create opportunities for them to manifest. Establish an evening reflection practice where you review the day's interactions through the lens of energy and alignment. Ask yourself, which relationships today left me feeling more connected to my authentic self? Which ones pulled me away from my center? What patterns am I noticing? How can I make tomorrow's choices more aligned with who I'm becoming? This practice transforms unconscious relationship patterns into conscious choices. Instead of drifting through interactions on autopilot, you begin to engage with intentionality and awareness. The integration of all you've learned. As you master these practices, you'll notice a fundamental shift in how you move through the world. You'll no longer feel desperate for approval from people whose values don't align with yours. You'll stop explaining yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. You'll cease apologizing for taking up space in the world with your authentic dreams and aspirations. The relationships that remain after you've released the weakening ties will be stronger, more authentic, and more nourishing than anything you've experienced before. These will be connections based on mutual respect for each other's growth, rather than mutual agreement to stay small. They'll be relationships where love expresses itself through encouragement rather than limitation, where care manifests as challenge rather than comfort, where true intimacy emerges from seeing and honoring each other's potential. You'll discover that by refusing to settle for relationships that diminish you, you've made space for relationships that elevate you. By declining to invest your energy in people who can't see your worth, you've freed up that energy to pour into connections with people who not only see your value, but actively support its expression. The people who initially resisted your growth will either adapt to your new standards or naturally drift out of your orbit. Those who adapt will often thank you later for refusing to enable their limitations. They'll recognize that your commitment to your own growth gave them permission to pursue their own. Those who don't adapt will find other people to join them in their commitment to staying comfortable, and that's perfectly fine. Most importantly, you'll have reclaimed your power to choose who gets access to your energy, your dreams, and your inner world. You'll have learned to distinguish between connections that serve your evolution and connections that stunt it. You'll have developed the courage to disappoint others in service of honoring yourself. This isn't the end of your growth. It's the beginning of growth that's no longer constrained by other people's fears and limitations. You've cleared the ground of your relational garden and planted seeds that honor your authentic nature. Now you get to tend that garden with the wisdom of someone who knows the difference between what nourishes growth and what stunts it. The path ahead is yours to walk, supported by relationships that celebrate your journey rather than question your destination. You've broken free from the ties that weakened you and forged new connections that strengthen you. You've learned to love people without letting their limitations become your ceiling. You've discovered that true loyalty to others begins with loyalty to your own highest potential. When you master the art of breaking weakening ties while cultivating strengthening ones, you don't just change your own life, you model for others. What's possible when someone chooses growth over comfort, authenticity over approval, potential over safety? You become living proof that it's possible to love people deeply while refusing to be diminished by their fears. The person you're becoming deserves relationships that honor your growth, conversations that inspire your potential, and connections that celebrate your authenticity. You now have the tools to create exactly that kind of relational environment. Use them wisely, consistently, and with the confidence of someone who knows their worth doesn't depend on anyone else's ability to see it. When you master the art of releasing what weakens you while embracing what strengthens you, nothing and no one can shake the foundation of who you're becoming.